Before the story begins, just a quick request. If you enjoy real, intense stories like this, the kind that stay with you even after the video ends, make sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, but it really helps me keep bringing you more stories just like this. Now, let's get into the story. I'm in my late 20s now, and every once in a while, something completely random will pull me right back to that trip. My parents still enjoy those kinds of vacations, but I haven't gone with them in years. It's not because I dislike the outdoors. I actually loved those trips growing up. But that particular one really got into my head in a way I never fully shook off. My parents were never the type to fly off to crowded resorts or busy tourist spots. My dad especially preferred quiet, tucked-away places where you could rent a cabin for a week, cook your own meals, and just exist in nature. When I was younger, we did that pretty often during school breaks. Most of the places were small rentals you'd find online, wooden cabins near lakes or forests, the kind of spots where families go fishing, hiking, and just disconnect. That year, they picked a cabin in a forested area a few hours from home. The drive took most of the afternoon, with my mom stopping every now and then at roadside shops to grab snacks. By the time we arrived, the place actually looked beautiful. It wasn't just a single, isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere. Instead, it was a small cluster of cabins spread out around a lake. The cabins weren't packed together, but they weren't completely isolated either. At night, you could see soft lights glowing from other cabins across the water or faintly through the trees. There were probably 10 or 12 cabins in total, and most of them were occupied. I remember seeing kids riding bikes along the dirt paths and a couple of older people quietly fishing from a small dock. In the center of the area, there was an open communal space where people could cook. It had a covered picnic structure with a few grills, large wooden tables, and strings of lights hanging across the beams. Those lights stayed on pretty late because people would gather there at night, cooking, talking, sometimes even sharing food. It felt less like a random vacation spot and more like a temporary little community. Our cabin was just a short walk from that cooking area, maybe 2 or 3 minutes down a dirt trail that cut through the trees. The path had small lights lining it, which I remember appreciating because once the sun went down, the forest got very dark. The first couple of days were completely normal. We spent most of our time near the lake. My dad rented a small canoe and kept trying to teach me how to paddle properly, even though I mostly just made us spin in circles. My mom liked taking slow walks around the lake in the mornings with her coffee. At night, we'd bring food to the cooking area and grill dinner. Burgers one night, chicken the next. Sometimes we'd chat with other families staying there. Just simple vacation conversations, where people were from, how long they were staying. I remember one family with 2 little kids feeding bread to ducks by the dock, and an older couple in their 60s staying in a cabin across the lake. The whole place had this relaxed, unspoken sense of people looking out for each other. Then that night happened. It was getting late, and my parents were still at the cooking area finishing dinner. I had already eaten and was starting to feel tired. I asked if I could walk back to the cabin to grab my hoodie because it had gotten a bit colder after sunset. They didn't think anything of it. The trail was short, well lit, and there were still people around. It didn't feel dangerous at all. So I started walking. Behind me, I could still hear voices, people talking, dishes clinking near the grills. The trail itself was simple, just packed dirt with small lights every 20 feet or so. They weren't bright, but they were enough to guide you. Trees lined both sides of the trail, thick but not overwhelming. It didn't feel creepy, just a normal forest at night. For most of the walk, everything felt fine. I was just thinking about grabbing my hoodie and maybe my phone charger. Then, about halfway down the trail, I slowed down. I heard something off to the side, in the trees. At first, I assumed it was an animal. There were squirrels everywhere during the day, and the property owners had mentioned raccoons coming around at night. But this sound didn't quite match that. It felt different. I stopped and looked toward the left side of the trail. The light didn't reach very far into the woods, so all I could really see were dark shapes, tree trunks, and shadows. Then I heard a voice, quiet but clear enough that there was no doubt someone had spoken. "Hey." It sounded like someone trying to get my attention without raising their voice. I figured it must be another guest who had stepped off the trail for some reason. But the strange thing was, I couldn't see anyone. I hesitated and said something like, "Hello?" while staying right where I was on the path. No response. A few seconds passed, and then I heard movement again, like someone shifting their weight or adjusting their position behind the trees. But they never stepped into the light. That was the part that felt wrong. If someone wanted to talk, why stay hidden? They said something else after that, something short, like they were trying to keep the interaction going, but I don't remember the exact words anymore. It wasn't threatening, just off. And in that moment, I got this strong, instinctive feeling that I needed to leave immediately. I didn't try to continue the conversation. I just turned around and started walking back toward the cooking area. Then walking turned into fast walking, and fast walking turned into running. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the cooking area, I was out of breath and probably looked completely shaken. My parents noticed right away and asked what was wrong. I told them someone had been standing in the trees talking to me, and that something about it didn't feel right. My dad grabbed a flashlight and walked back down the trail to check while my mom stayed with me. When he came back, he said he didn't see anyone. He had walked the entire path, checked around the trees, nothing. A couple of other adults nearby overheard everything and said they hadn't seen anyone around the trail either. Eventually, everyone settled on the idea that it must have been another guest who stepped off the path for a moment and left before my dad got there. I tried to accept that, but something about the way that person stayed hidden kept bothering me. The next morning, my parents went back to the cooking area to make breakfast. Our cabin had a small kitchen, but my dad preferred using the outdoor grills. I told them I wanted to stay behind for a bit because I was still tired. They were fine with it. The cabin wasn't far, and they weren't planning to be gone long. So I stayed. I was sitting at the small table, scrolling through my phone, half watching something on the tiny TV. The cabin was simple. Small living area, compact kitchen, a bedroom for my parents, and a pull-out couch where I slept. There was also a back door that led to a wooden deck facing deeper into the forest. We didn't use that door much. Everything felt quiet, peaceful. I could hear birds outside and faint voices from other cabins in the distance. Then, at some point, I heard the back door open. At first, my brain didn't react. I just assumed it was one of my parents. But then I realized something. They always called out when they came in. Always. These footsteps didn't sound like them either. They were quicker, more direct. Before I could even turn around properly, something was thrown over my head. A thick cloth, maybe a bag. Instant darkness. For a second, my brain couldn't even process what was happening. It felt unreal, like some kind of prank. Then I felt hands grabbing me. That's when panic hit. I started screaming. The person holding me began moving, trying to drag or carry me. I fought as hard as I could, kicking, twisting, anything to make it harder for them. Within seconds, I felt the ground change beneath me, from wooden flooring to rough dirt and leaves. We were already outside. Everything was chaos. I couldn't see anything, couldn't understand what was happening, just reacting on instinct. Then I heard voices in the distance, people shouting, "What's going on? Hey!" And suddenly, the person dropped me. I hit the ground hard, and at the same time, the cloth slipped off my head. I was lying there, disoriented, trying to make sense of where I was. I could see the back of our cabin just a few feet away, and then I saw them, just for a second, a figure in dark clothing running into the trees, and then they were gone. My parents came running from the direction of the cooking area, along with a few other people from nearby cabins. Within minutes, more people gathered. Everyone had heard the screaming. The police were called. The property owners showed up, but I couldn't give them much. The cloth had covered my head almost immediately. I never saw the person clearly. They checked the area, spoke to other guests, but no one had seen anything suspicious. The officers said it was possible someone had come in from outside the property. The cabins weren't fenced, and the forest stretched for miles. They never found anyone. We packed up that same day and left. And that voice from the night before, I have no proof it's connected, but it's always stayed with me. Someone hiding in the trees, trying to get my attention. And then, the next morning, someone inside the cabin. Because if no one had heard me screaming, I don't know if that person would have let go. Before we move on to the next story, just a quick request. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please take a second to do it. It really helps support the channel and keeps these stories coming. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit the like button as well. It only takes a moment, but it means a lot. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and when people say rural, they sometimes mean quiet suburbs with a bit of space between houses. This wasn't that kind of rural. This was the other kind. Dirt driveways, old barns leaning with age, long gravel roads, and mailboxes sitting half a mile away from the actual houses. My parents moved there when I was about 12 after my dad got a job outside the county. The house we lived in was simple, a one-story place with a basement and a big backyard that seemed to melt right into the woods behind it. My parents loved it immediately. My mom always said she preferred how peaceful it felt compared to the small city she grew up in. For me, growing up there meant spending a lot of time outside. There really wasn't much else to do. Most of my teenage years were spent wandering through the woods, riding my bike along dusty roads, or helping my dad with random projects around the property. Behind our house, there was a long trail that cut through the trees and eventually led to a creek about half a mile away. People in the area used it regularly. Some neighbors walked their dogs along it, others used it as a shortcut between properties instead of taking the road. Near the start of that trail, there was a house that everyone seemed to quietly avoid. Not in a dramatic, obvious way where people warned you about it. It was more subtle than that. Even when I was younger, I picked up on the fact that nobody really talked about them. Conversations would just skip over that house entirely. The place itself always looked a little off compared to everything around it. Most of the homes nearby were older farmhouses or small ranch-style places with tidy yards. That house always looked neglected. The grass was overgrown more often than not. There were random things scattered around the yard, broken chairs, old tires, stuff that didn't seem to belong anywhere. And the curtains in the windows were always closed. A couple and their son lived there. I don't even remember their last name anymore, which honestly might be for the best. My parents knew them a bit better than I did, just because adults in small towns tend to cross paths more often. From what my mom used to say, the parents were strange, but not necessarily bad people, just very private, almost defensive whenever anyone tried to get too friendly. Their son was older than me by quite a bit. He still lived at home, which wasn't that unusual for a rural area, but there was something about him that made people uncomfortable. It's hard to explain exactly what it was. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was usually short, quiet responses or something mumbled under his breath. And if you passed him on the road, he would stare a little too long, not in a curious way, more like a blank, lingering stare that didn't feel normal. My parents told me to keep my distance. That wasn't hard. We barely interacted with them anyway. By the time I reached my early 20s, I was still living at home while taking classes at a community college about 40 minutes away. I also worked part-time at a store in the next town over. My routine was pretty simple. Classes a few days a week, work on weekends, and a lot of quiet evenings at home. One thing I continued doing regularly was walking that trail behind our house. It might sound boring, but when you grow up somewhere like that, it just becomes part of life. I'd put on my headphones, walk down the dirt path through the trees, and usually end up sitting by the creek for a while before heading back. The trail passed fairly close to that family's property at the beginning, but then it curved deeper into the woods. For years, it never once felt unsafe. The first time something felt off was one summer afternoon. It had been extremely hot that day, so I waited until evening when the air finally cooled down a bit before going for a walk. The sun was low, casting that soft golden light through the trees. It felt like any other peaceful evening. I had just stepped onto the trail when I saw him. He was standing near the edge of the woods, close to where the path passed by his family's yard. He wasn't blocking the trail, just standing off to the side. At first, I didn't think much of it. People in that area were outside all the time, working on things or just getting fresh air. But as I got closer, he started moving. Slowly, he stepped toward the trail. I pulled one earbud out, just in case he was about to say something. Sometimes neighbors would stop and talk if they recognized you. But when I got within a few feet of him, he did something I wasn't expecting at all. He reached his hand out toward mine. Not like a normal handshake. It felt like he was trying to take my hand. Instinctively, I pulled mine back and kept walking. It happened so fast that my brain didn't even fully process it at first. I remember mumbling something like, "Sorry," or "I've got to go," and continuing forward. But then he stepped closer. He started matching my pace. There was this awkward, uncomfortable moment where his arm brushed against mine, and it felt like he was trying again to grab my hand. The whole interaction lasted maybe a few seconds, but in that moment, it felt stretched out and wrong. I picked up my pace and kept moving, trying not to look back too much. Eventually, I stopped hearing his footsteps behind me. I kept walking until I reached the creek, but I didn't stay long. The way he reached for my hand stuck with me. I ended up heading home earlier than I planned. When I got back, both of my parents were in the kitchen. My mom was cooking, and my dad was sitting at the table reading the local newspaper, like he usually did. I told them what happened. At first, they reacted the same way I had tried to, brushing it off. My dad suggested maybe he was just being awkward or trying to greet me, but my mom looked more concerned. She asked me to explain it again, and I told her clearly that he tried to hold my hand and followed me for a few seconds on the trail. After a while, my dad decided he'd walk over to their house the next day and talk to the parents about it. That was pretty normal for where we lived. People handled things directly instead of calling the police right away. I wasn't there for that conversation, but when my dad came back, he looked irritated. According to him, the parents dismissed the whole thing and said I probably misunderstood. Then they went a step further and implied I might have encouraged it somehow. That didn't sit well with him at all. He told them very clearly that I hadn't done anything like that and that their son needed to stay away from me. From what I could tell, the conversation didn't go well. For a few days after that, everything seemed to settle back into normal. Then, one night, everything changed. It was late, around 2 in the morning. Our house was always extremely quiet at that hour, so when I woke up suddenly, it was because something felt off. At first, I thought maybe something had fallen in the kitchen or one of our cats had knocked something over. That wasn't unusual. But then I heard movement in the hallway. And then my bedroom door opened. For a split second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was a figure standing in the doorway. He was holding something in his hand. It was the neighbor's son, and it was a kitchen knife. Before I could even react, he rushed toward the bed and started swinging the knife downward. Everything happened at once. I tried to roll away, shouting for my parents as loud as I could. The room filled with noise, my voice, my dad yelling from the hallway, my mom shouting from their bedroom. My dad reached my room first and tackled him near the side of the bed. During that struggle, the knife caught my arm and shoulder. I remember feeling the pain, but it was distant, like my mind hadn't fully caught up to what was happening yet. The neighbor's son managed to break free and ran out of the room. By the time my dad got to the front door, he was already outside, disappearing into the darkness. After that, everything moved quickly. An ambulance arrived, the police showed up. I ended up spending several days in the hospital. None of my injuries were life-threatening, thankfully, but they were serious enough that the doctors wanted to keep me under observation. The police arrested him not long after the attack. Apparently, he hadn't even tried to hide. What followed stretched out over years. Court hearings, legal processes, restraining orders, all the complicated aftermath that comes with something like that. He spent time in prison, but the story didn't end there. Over the years, I would occasionally hear updates through people back home. Small towns have a way of passing information around, even when you're not actively looking for it. He was in and out of prison multiple times for different offenses. His parents passed away a few years apart. The house, though, stayed. It slowly fell apart with no one taking care of it, eventually becoming one of those abandoned places people just ignored. Then, about 5 or 6 years ago, I heard something that brought that same uneasy feeling back. The neighbor's son had been found dead inside that house. From what I was told, it had been vacant for a long time, and somehow he ended up back there, living alone. No one really knows what happened. He was discovered after someone noticed a strange smell coming from the property and called the authorities. Now the windows are covered with plywood, and the yard is completely overgrown. Whenever I visit my parents and drive past that road, the house is still there, sitting quietly among the trees. Most people who pass by probably have no idea what happened there. But for me, every time I see it, I'm taken right back to that night and how close everything came to ending very differently. Out of all the strange or frightening moments someone might experience in life, that one still stands out as the most unsettling thing I've ever been through. The only reason I remember that time period so clearly is because it was the job I had right before the pandemic started changing everything. It was one of those jobs where your schedule slowly drifts later and later without you really noticing, until suddenly you're getting home close to midnight almost every night. At the time, I was living alone in an older apartment building. It had 3 floors and maybe 12 units total, small enough that you'd recognize most of the people who live there, even if you didn't actually talk to them. The entrance was on the side of the building, facing a narrow parking lot. There was a single porch-style light above the door that stayed on all night, casting this dull yellow glow over the area. The front door technically locked, but people were constantly coming and going. Half the time, someone didn't shut it all the way, so it would just sit slightly open. Most nights, I'd get off work around 10:30 or 11, drive about 20 minutes back, usually stop somewhere to grab something quick to eat, and then come home already feeling drained. I barely paid attention to anything around the building. I'd park, grab my bag, head inside, and go straight upstairs. That night started the same way. I pulled into the parking lot and noticed a few cars parked there like usual. One belonged to a guy on the first floor who worked construction, and another was from a couple who lived upstairs across the hall from me. As I walked toward the entrance, I saw a man standing near the door. He was leaning slightly against the wall, smoking a cigarette. That, by itself, wasn't unusual. People in the building did that all the time instead of smoking inside. He looked like he was in his mid-30s. I remember the smell of the cigarette smoke drifting across the walkway as I got closer. When I approached, he gave me a small nod, the kind strangers give each other in passing. I didn't recognize him, but that didn't immediately feel strange. People had friends over all the time or visitors stopping by. Right as I reached the door, he spoke. "Hey, which floor do you live on?" The question caught me off guard in that slightly awkward way, like when someone asks something and you're not sure why they need to know. I assumed he was trying to find someone and didn't know where their apartment was. Instead of giving a direct answer, I kept it vague and said something like, "Upstairs." I didn't stop walking, I just opened the door and went inside. As I did, I think I heard him say something behind me, maybe "all right" or something similar, but I didn't turn around or continue the conversation. At the time, it barely stayed in my mind for more than a few seconds. Conversations like that happen all the time around apartment buildings. It didn't feel threatening. Looking back now, though, the part that sticks with me is the way he asked it. It didn't sound like casual small talk. It sounded like he wanted something specific. Still, I went upstairs, unlocked my apartment, and spent the rest of the night like any other. Ate, relaxed a bit, and eventually went to sleep. The next day was completely normal, too. Work was busy, nothing unusual happened, and I left around the same time that evening. I do remember feeling more tired than usual because I'd stayed up a little too late the night before. When I got home that night, the parking lot looked the same as always. I didn't see anyone outside, and I didn't think about the guy from the previous night at all. My apartment was on the second floor, toward the back corner of the building. One of the windows faced a narrow side alley between buildings. It wasn't a busy area, just a strip of grass and a couple of dumpsters behind another property. My nighttime routine was pretty simple. After getting home, I'd usually take a shower, eat something, and then sit at my desk for a while, scrolling through my phone or watching something. That night, I was sitting near the window because my small desk was right beside it. The blinds were halfway open. I liked having a little bit of outside light coming in instead of the room feeling completely closed off. It was probably around midnight when something outside caught my attention. At first, it was just movement, a shape near the window. The angle was a little strange because my window was slightly above ground level, but not by much. Someone standing right up against the wall could still reach it. As my eyes adjusted, I realized there was someone outside, right up against the glass. It was the same man from the night before. He had one hand pressed against the frame, like he was trying to push the window upward. The window wasn't fully open, but I sometimes left it cracked slightly for airflow, a habit that suddenly felt like a really bad idea. I just froze, staring, trying to process what I was seeing. He wasn't just standing there. His hands were actively working at the bottom of the frame, like he was trying to force it open further. That's when everything clicked. I shouted. His head snapped up, and our eyes met through the glass. His expression was completely different from the calm, casual way he had acted outside the night before. It's hard to describe exactly what it was, but there was this intense, almost angry look on his face that made everything feel instantly real. Before I could even move away from the desk, the window lifted several inches. One of his arms pushed inside. My chair tipped backward when I stood up too fast. I remember the loud crash as it hit the floor, mixed with the sound of my own voice yelling again. His hand came through the opening and grabbed at my hair as I tried to back away. He only caught a small section near the back of my head, but it was enough to yank hard for a second before I managed to pull forward and break free. That's when pure panic took over. Instead of trying to slam the window shut, I ran straight for the apartment door. My body was on autopilot. I grabbed my keys off the counter, opened the door, and ran into the hallway barefoot without even thinking about it. I started pounding on the door of the couple who lived across from me. I didn't know them well, but I knew they were usually home around that time. After a few seconds, the guy opened the door, looking confused. I must have looked completely terrified because his expression changed immediately and he stepped into the hallway asking what happened. While I was trying to explain, another neighbor from downstairs came up after hearing the noise. Within a minute or two, there were 3 people standing there with me in the hallway while I explained that someone had been trying to climb through my window. I stayed inside their apartment with his girlfriend because I was shaking so badly. A few minutes later, they came back and said they couldn't see anyone outside anymore. That's when someone called the police. During that time, the whole building slowly became aware that something had happened. Doors opened. People stepped into the hallway asking questions. The place that was usually quiet at night suddenly felt tense and unsettled. When the police arrived, they checked around the property. Eventually, they found him. He was hiding in the stairwell area near the back of the building. Apparently, he had slipped inside through the front entrance at some point. Seeing him again when they brought him out felt surreal. Part of me couldn't believe it was the same person, the one who had casually stood outside the night before, smoking and asking which floor I lived on. One of the officers later told me he actually lived a few houses down the street. Several people in the area knew who he was because he'd been arrested before for different incidents, mostly involving women in the neighborhood. That night, they took him away again. The police asked me questions about everything that had happened, and the neighbors who helped me also spoke with them for a while. Eventually, things settled down. People went back into their apartments, and the building slowly returned to its usual quiet. But something about it had changed. Because the night before, the very first thing he asked me was which floor I lived on. At the time, it sounded like meaningless small talk. Now it feels obvious. He wasn't making conversation. He was trying to figure out exactly where I would be.